I put sleeping pills in my wife's lover's drink. When he woke up, he was tied to my kitchen chair. His face was a mixture of panic and confusion, and I knew that in that moment I had all the power. He tried to free himself, shook his legs, but the knots were tight. I lifted the chair and dragged it to the center of the kitchen, making a dry noise on the floor. I looked at him for a few seconds, saying nothing. Just observing. It was enough to see sweat break out on his forehead. He tried to speak, but his dry mouth betrayed him. So I broke the silence. Now get ready for the questions, tell me everything about you and my wife and I'll let you go. He froze. For a moment, I saw hope in his eyes that this was just a misunderstanding, but it soon disappeared. He knew it was over. I took a deep breath. Every second of that silence hurt like I was stabbing a dagger into my chest. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how I got there. I wanted to know at what point the woman I loved decided that I was no longer enough. And, above all, she wanted to hear from him what she never had the courage to say. He shifted in his chair, pulling his arms, and then said in a trembling voice, "Look, I didn't even know she was married. She said you were separated. That you had left the house and were only coming back to get some things. I swear, man. I didn't know. Liars have a specific smell." He emanated this smell. I stood still, staring at him, letting the weight of my presence crush him. "Didn't you know? So how do you explain the hidden messages on her cell phone? The lame excuses for leaving the house in the middle of the night? How do you explain her clothes smelling like cheap perfume when she came back?" He swallowed hard. I was hoping he would lie again. Waiting for anything that would give me a reason to tighten the knots even more and make him sweat some more. But, to my surprise, he started talking. "She said you couldn't see her anymore. That you lived like roommates. That there was no longer passion, only obligations. She said she wanted to feel alive." He stopped for a second and looked down. "She said I made her feel alive." Every word was a blade. I could feel my stomach turning. I wanted to hate that man, but all I felt was suffocating emptiness. As if, somehow, I already knew. As if he had already been waiting for it. I took a knife from the drawer. His eyes widened, his entire body tensed, and I cut the rope binding his hands. But before he could even think about getting up, I placed the knife on the table, right between the two of us. "You're not going anywhere until you tell me everything. I want to know every detail. Every encounter. Every word. I want to know what she told you about me." He hesitated. "I know he thought about running. I know you assessed your chances of getting out of that kitchen alive. But I also knew I had no other choice." Little by little, the words began to come out. And with each sentence, I felt a piece of me shatter. "She said you were controlling. That you didn't trust her. Who spent all his time worried about work and never paid attention to her. She said you only noticed her presence when you needed something. When I wanted sex or food or a shoulder to vent on. And I listened to her. I gave her the attention she said she never had. I made her feel wanted." I slammed my hands on the table, making him jump in his chair. "And you thought that was enough? That listening to a married woman's complaints gave you the right to enter my house? To share her bed?" He was silent. For the first time, I realized he was truly scared. Not what I could do, but what I already knew. Because there was something more. Something he was holding. I knew he had more to say. Something that would change everything. He looked away, but I hit the table again. "He speaks." He took a deep breath and released the words as if they burned in his throat. "She also lied to me. He said he loved me. He said he wanted to leave you, but he was afraid of how you would react. Said you were dangerous. But now I see that she lied to both of us." His words echoed in my mind. I looked at the knife on the table and then at him. What if she lied? What if this was all a game? What if she had been manipulating both of us from the beginning? Suddenly, the idea that I could be just a piece in a bigger plan took hold of me. I stood up, pacing back and forth, while he watched me in silence. I was about to ask more questions when the sound of a car parking outside interrupted us. I looked out the window and saw the shadow of a woman approaching the door. She was at home. The lover grew even paler. "It's her, isn't it?" I asked, and he just shook his head. So, I turned to him. "Don't make any sound. If you talk, I'll finish you now." The door opened, and there she was. Her eyes widened when she saw us. And at that moment, I knew there was something even deeper happening. She didn't seem surprised. She didn't seem scared. She looked prepared. But nothing prepared me for what I heard next. Because before I could say anything, she looked directly at her tied-up lover and said, "Did you tell him?" He looked at me, then at her, and then lowered his head. My heart raced. What should he have said? I wanted answers, but now I had even bigger questions. Because, in that moment, I realized that betrayal was just the surface of something much darker. And her words echoed in my mind like a warning. "Did you tell him?" The knife was still on the table, and the lover was still tied up. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't the one in control. Because what was about to be revealed could change everything. Welcome to the channel, where we explore the intense dramas and devastating consequences of betrayal. Make it clear, we do not support, under any circumstances, any type of betrayal. All the stories here are fictional, created to show how disloyalty can destroy lives, families, and hearts. Get ready to dive into an engaging and shocking narrative. A story that will hold your attention from beginning to end. Take a deep breath, the truth always finds a way to surface. Good story. Daniel and Laura's home was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by manicured gardens and trees that swayed gently in the wind. It was the kind of place where neighbors greeted each other as they passed by, and the sound of children playing in the street mingled with birdsong. Inside, the house reflected years of care and dedication. Each piece of furniture, each painting on the wall, carried memories built together. The sofa in the living room still bore the marks of the first years of marriage, when the two spent nights cuddled up watching movies and dreaming about the future. The dinner table was the scene of endless conversations, laughter and, sometimes, arguments drowned out by the promise to resolve everything before bed. Daniel has always been a meticulous man. He liked to plan every detail of his life, from work to leisure time. He worked as an architect and spent hours sketching projects, creating spaces that combined functionality and beauty. He was proud of his career and the respect he gained in the market. However, it was at home, next to Laura, that he felt truly complete. For him, she was the balance between reason and emotion. Laura, on the other hand, had a free soul. Graduated in arts, she transformed white canvases into explosions of colors and feelings. Her studio was in the backyard, a space that Daniel built especially for her when their marriage was 5 years old. For Laura, that gift was a proof of love. A place where she could create without interruption and at the same time feel connected to the man she loved. They met in college, at an event organized by the architecture department. Daniel was looking for references for a project and ended up stopping at the exhibition pavilion, where Laura was exhibiting her paintings. It was there, among brushes and scattered paints, that it all began. She was enchanted by his serious and focused manner, while Daniel was lost in her spontaneity and vibrant energy. The relationship blossomed quickly, and a few months later, they were already talking about marriage. To their friends, they were the perfect couple, a combination of creativity and stability. But, as in any relationship, the routine began to take its toll over time. Daniel worked late, immersed in projects that required meticulous attention. Laura, on the other hand, spent her days in the studio, seeking inspiration for her works. The mismatched schedules began to create small spaces of silence between the two. In the beginning, these moments were filled with affectionate messages and plans for the weekend. However, little by little, the conversations became shorter, and the smiles, less frequent. Daniel noticed the change, but chose to believe it was just a phase. After all couples face periods like this. Laura also felt the separation, but didn't know how to deal with it. He tried to rekindle the flame with simple gestures, candlelit dinners, notes left in jacket pockets, provocative smiles as he passed by. Sometimes it worked, but other times, it felt like Daniel was too far gone, lost in his own thoughts. And it hurt her more than she admitted. She loved him, but she was beginning to wonder if love was enough. When they were together, his touch still gave them goosebumps, but when they were apart, the loneliness weighed like a burden. However, to outsiders, Daniel and Laura were still the ideal couple. He always made a point of holding her hand in public, and Laura smiled as if nothing in the world could shake that connection. They kept up appearances because, deep down, they both wanted to believe that everything could still be as it was before. But the truth was that the emotional distance was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Laura spent more time in the studio, creating works that reflected her inner restlessness. The lines were intense, the colors too vibrant, almost aggressive. Daniel noticed the change in her style and asked, one night, if everything was okay. She smiled and said she was just trying out new techniques. He believed. Or wanted to believe. As much as I had doubts, I preferred not to pressure her. And so, the two continued to live in a kind of fragile balance, always on the edge of something neither of them could name. One day, Daniel arrived home early, decided to surprise her. He bought flowers on the way, something he hadn't done in months, and stopped by the bakery to pick up her favorite candy. As he parked, he felt a slight anxiety. Maybe this would be the night they finally talked about what was wrong. Maybe they could laugh together and start over. But when he entered, he found the house empty. He called out to her, but there was no response. In the studio, the lights were off. He looked around, feeling the weight of the silence. Laura returned an hour later, carrying bags and smiling as if nothing was out of place. Daniel didn't ask where she was. He just handed over the flowers and the candy, and saw her smile light up. They had dinner together that night, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But inside him, something continued to bother him. In the following days, Daniel started to notice more. The calls she answered in a low voice, the distracted smiles while looking at her cell phone, the frequent delays in returning home. He tried to push away the thoughts that were beginning to take shape, but he couldn't ignore the signs. Laura, on the other hand, seemed lighter, as if she had found something that made her happy again. Friends noticed the difference. They commented on how Laura was more radiant, more alive. And how Daniel seemed more serious, more distant. But no one asked questions. They just watched, imagining that everything would resolve itself with time. Daniel clung to the idea that this was just a phase, but deep down, he felt the ground opening up beneath his feet. And every time he looked at Laura, smiling like nothing was wrong, he wondered what he was missing. What I wasn't seeing. That night, while Laura slept next to him, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her scent was still in the air, sweet and familiar, but there was something different. Something he couldn't name. And as silence filled the room, he knew he could no longer ignore the questions that haunted him. What was happening? What didn't he already know? And, above all, what would you do if you found out? Daniel woke up that morning with an uncomfortable feeling, as if something invisible was hovering over him. The muffled sound of the shower in the bathroom next door indicated that Laura was already getting ready to leave. He lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the restlessness that had consumed him for weeks. When he finally got up, Laura was already in the room, wrapped in a towel, her hair dripping water onto the floor. She smiled at him, a quick smile, without the same intensity as before. He said he had a meeting with a client and needed to hurry. Daniel nodded, watching her dress more carefully than usual. He noticed the striking perfume she sprayed on her neck and the way she checked her cell phone before putting it in her bag. He had breakfast alone after she left. The smell of perfume still hung in the air, mixed with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, creating a strange feeling of emptiness. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept going back to Laura. The changes in recent months weren't just subtle, they were stark. The changed schedules, the distant smiles, the lack of clear answers when he asked where she had been. All of this began to weigh more than he could bear. That afternoon, Daniel decided to leave the office early. I felt like I needed to clear my mind. He walked to the cafe where they used to go when they were still boyfriends. He ordered an espresso and sat at a table in the corner, watching people come and go, each carrying their own invisible stories. But even there, the feeling of uneasiness did not leave him. He picked up his cell phone and, without thinking much, decided to call Laura. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. He hung up and took the last sip of his coffee, feeling a bitter taste that didn't just come from the drink. As he walked home, he saw Laura's car parked a few blocks away. It shouldn't be there. He parked across the street and watched. A few minutes later, she left a commercial building, accompanied by a man. They were too close, laughing at something he said, and Laura touched his arm in a casual but intimate way. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He didn't want to believe what he saw. He stood there, standing still, while they got into the car together and headed towards the center. Daniel's stomach churned as he followed them at a safe distance. Each kilometer traveled seemed to drag with it pieces of everything he had built. When they finally parked in front of an inconspicuous hotel, Daniel felt the impact like a punch to the stomach. He watched Laura get out of the car and wait while the man opened the door for her. They disappeared through the main entrance, leaving Daniel alone with his heart racing and breathing heavy. He stayed in the car for several minutes before working up the courage to get out. He entered the hotel lobby, trying to remain calm, but he felt his hands shaking. He asked reception if he could use the phone for an urgent call, but really he just wanted to observe. It didn't take long to see them crossing the corridor towards the elevator. Laura smiled, as if nothing in the world could shake that moment. Daniel clenched his fists and left before anyone noticed his presence. Back home, he sat at the kitchen table, staring into space. Every detail of that moment replayed in his mind, like a broken movie. He felt his anger rising, but with it came a cutting pain. He never imagined that Laura was capable of that. He felt betrayed, humiliated, but most of all, he felt lost. He got up, walked through the house and went to Laura's study. The walls were covered in unfinished canvases, chaotic paintings that reflected what she seemed to be feeling lately. He ran his fingers over one of them, smearing the tip with fresh ink. It was there, in that space he had built for her, that the first tear fell. That night, Laura arrived later than usual. Daniel was in the living room, waiting for her. When she entered, she tried to smile, but immediately noticed his gaze. He asked if something had happened, and Daniel responded with a calmness that surprised him. He said he wanted to talk. She hesitated for a moment, but sat down on the couch, keeping her hands in her lap. Daniel started by asking about the work, the clients, the schedules. Laura responded in short sentences, looking away whenever she could. Then he asked her where she had been that afternoon. Laura was silent, looking at her hands. He insisted, and she said she was working something out with a friend. Daniel leaned forward, looking at her. He said he saw her leave the building, get into the car with the man and go to the hotel. The silence that followed was deafening. Laura opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find any words. Daniel's anger finally exploded. He got up, pacing back and forth, asking how she could do that, how she had the courage to destroy everything they had built together. Laura started to cry, but he couldn't stop. He asked who the man was, how long it had been happening. She begged him to listen, but her every word felt like a knife. When she finally managed to speak, Laura said she never wanted to hurt him. That she was feeling alone, invisible. He said he didn't plan anything, that it happened, but Daniel couldn't hear anything else. All he saw was the image of her entering the hotel. The man opening the door for her. The smiles, the touches. Each scene replayed in his mind like a nightmare. He left home that night. He drove aimlessly, trying to find a way to understand what had happened. He stopped at a gas station, bought a coffee and stood there, staring into space. Hours passed, but he was unable to return home. He felt broken, unable to face Laura again. When he finally returned, he found her sitting in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. She asked to talk, but Daniel could only say that he needed time. He went upstairs and locked himself in the bedroom, while she stayed in the kitchen, lost in thought. But as Daniel tried to process the pain of betrayal, something continued to bother him. Something in Laura's eyes. A tension he couldn't explain. Because as devastating as the betrayal was, he felt there was more. Something she wasn't counting on. And that suspicion, however vague, was what kept him from sleeping that night. The sound of raindrops hitting the windows echoed through the kitchen, mixing with the dense silence that filled the room. Daniel watched the man tied to the chair, his eyes wide and his heavy breathing betraying the fear he was trying to hide. Laura was standing next to the door, her arms crossed and her face pale. Her gaze oscillated between her lover and her husband, as if searching for a way out, an explanation that could undo the chaos that had taken place. Daniel held the knife in his hand, his fingers gripping the handle so hard that the knots turned white. He felt his chest burning, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his voice came out firm, almost cold. Now I want to know the truth. The whole truth. And if you lie, I swear this won't end well for you. The man tried to speak, but his voice failed, as if the words were stuck in his throat. Laura took a step forward, her voice shaking. Daniel, please, it doesn't have to be like this. We can talk calmly. We can resolve this. But he didn't look away from the man. I'm not talking to you. I want to hear from him. I want to know why you were in my car, going into that hotel with my wife. I want to know how you had the courage to destroy everything I built. The man took a deep breath and closed his eyes, as if he was gathering the strength to say what he needed to say. I didn't know, he began, his voice low and clipped. I didn't know she was still married. She told me that you were separated, that you were breaking up, but that you didn't want to sign the papers. She said you still lived in the same house because she had nowhere to go. Laura shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. It's not true. I never said that. I never lied. I was just confused. I was trying to understand what I felt. But Daniel raised his hand, silencing her. Confused? Were you confused? And you thought the best way to resolve this was to run into the arms of another man? Laura flinched, but the man continued speaking. I fell in love with her. I know it sounds crazy, but I believed everything she said. She made me feel needed, important. Said you made her feel invisible. That he never paid attention to her. Daniel laughed, a short, bitter laugh. Invisible? Do you think you build an entire studio for someone you want to ignore? Do you find that you work late, making plans for the future, because it means nothing? I did everything for you, Laura. I put you above everything. She finally lost control, tears streaming down her face. And that was the problem. You put everything above me. The work, the projects, the plans. You were always too busy to notice that I was here, waiting for you. And when I tried to get closer, you pushed me away. I just wanted to feel alive again. I just wanted to feel like I was still important to someone. The silence that followed was piercing. Daniel looked at her as if he were seeing a stranger. He wanted to scream, wanted to break everything around him, but instead he sat in the chair in front of his lover and ran his hands over his face. "And what did you plan to do? Keep this up until when? Until I find out? Or were you already planning to leave?" Laura hesitated, looking at the floor. "I don't know. I don't know what I was going to do. I just know I didn't want to hurt you." Daniel banged the table, making them both jump. "Didn't you want to hurt me? How can you say that after everything? After betraying me, humiliating me like that? And you?" He turned to his lover. "Did you think she would drop everything for you? Did you think you could take my place?" The man shook his head. "I just wanted to be with her. I just wanted to be happy." Daniel got up, walking to the window. His reflection in the glass looked like a different man. A broken man. He took a deep breath, trying to find some logic amidst the chaos. But then something hit him. The man's words. He just wanted to be happy. Daniel turned around slowly, facing him. "You are lying. It wasn't just that. There's something more. I know it has." The man looked away, but Daniel approached, his eyes fixed on him. "He speaks. Now." The lover finally broke down, the words coming out in a rush. "She told me she was afraid of you. Said you were controlling, obsessive. That I had already done things before. Who had threatened her. Said you might hurt her if you found out." Daniel felt his blood run cold. That didn't make sense. He had never raised his hand to Laura, never shouted at her. He always tried to be patient and understanding. Laura's eyes widened, running closer to her lover. "No, it's not true. I never said that. I never said he was dangerous." But Daniel saw the hesitation in her eyes. He saw the fear. And then everything started to fall into place. The distance, the secrets, the lies. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about manipulation. About control. Laura was playing with both of them. Creating stories to justify her actions, to keep them both tied to what she wanted. He felt the anger bubble up again, but this time there was something more. A painful clarity. "So that was it?" he said, his voice low and clipped. "You used both. It made him believe I was a monster, and it made me believe that everything was okay, that I just needed space. And while I was trying to save this, you had already decided to end it all." Laura cried, begging him to listen, but Daniel could no longer hear anything. He felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Everything I believed to be true had crumbled. The lover remained silent, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if he finally understood the role he had played in that story. And Daniel knew that nothing would be the same after that night. Because as much as the truth was exposed, there was still something buried beneath the surface. Something Laura was hiding. Something he still needed to discover. The knife on the table felt like an invisible weight on everyone in the room. The silence was piercing, broken only by the irregular sound of the still-tied man's breathing. Daniel walked away, feeling his heart hammering in his chest. Laura remained motionless, her eyes red and fixed on him, as if searching for words that could undo the damage. But there were no words. Not after that. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to maintain control, but the tension in the room was about to explode. "You said I was dangerous. That I could hurt you." Those words echoed in his mind, each repetition tightening a knot in his stomach. He slowly turned around, facing Laura, who finally took a step forward. "I never said that. I swear, Daniel. I was scared, yes, but not with you. I was scared of myself, of what I was feeling. But I never said you were violent. Never." He laughed, a dry, hollow laugh without any trace of humor. "So why did he think I was? Why was he prepared to flee when he woke up here? Why did you let him believe that?" She tried to respond, but her voice broke. The lover looked at her, his face pale, and then looked away. I asked questions. Lots of questions. She never gave me clear answers. He just said that he couldn't say much, that he needed to be careful. I filled in the blanks. It's my fault too. Daniel approached the table, resting his hands on the cool surface. Did you fill in the gaps? Or did you only hear what you wanted? Because that's what you two did. They pretended everything was fine while they stabbed me in the back. He turned to Laura, the anger returning. I spent years building this life for us. I gave you everything. And you threw it away like it meant nothing. She cried, but he didn't stop. You didn't just lie to me. You lied to him too. And now? What else are you hiding? Laura ran to him, holding his arms tightly. I'm not hiding anything, Daniel. I did a horrible thing. I was wrong. But I didn't want to destroy you. I just wanted to be happy. The words came out choked, and he pulled away, pulling his arms away. Happiness? Is this happiness for you? Destroy two people at the same time. The lover moved in his chair, trying to speak, but Daniel interrupted him. Shut up. I'm not done with you yet. Laura tried to get closer again, but he raised his hand, stopping her. You had the chance to tell me the truth. You had a chance to fix this. But no. You chose to continue lying. And now I don't know who you are anymore. He grabbed the knife from the table, cutting the ropes that bound his lover, and pushed him away. Go away. Get out of my house. Now. The man hesitated, but Daniel's eyes made it clear that there was no room for argument. He left quickly, stumbling through the door, leaving Laura and Daniel alone. Laura collapsed to the floor, her shoulders shaking from crying. Daniel stood still, watching her. Part of him wanted to go to her, hug her, tell her everything would be okay. But another part, the broken part, knew that was impossible. You don't understand, she said between sobs. I didn't want to hurt you. I was so lost. I felt suffocated. I loved you, Daniel. I still love it. But I needed to feel alive again. I needed to feel desired. He didn't say anything. He just kept looking, as if he were seeing a stranger. So why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you try to fix things? Why did you choose to destroy me instead? She raised her face, her eyes filled with despair. Because I was afraid. Afraid that you wouldn't hear me. Afraid that you hated me. He took a step back, voice barely above a whisper. And you think I don't hate you now? Laura swallowed. It's not that. I didn't know how to stop. Everything got out of control. I just wanted to escape myself, Daniel. And I didn't know how. He felt a tightness in his chest. A part of him still wanted to believe her. I still wanted to save her. But the weight of what she had done was crushing. So he did the only thing he could at that moment. It went out. He left her sitting in the kitchen, lost in tears, and walked out the front door, feeling the cold night air hit his face. He walked aimlessly, trying to organize his thoughts, trying to find some logic amidst the chaos. But nothing made sense. When he finally returned home, he found Laura sitting on the sofa, her eyes swollen. She looked at him as if waiting for a sentence. I don't know what you want me to say, Daniel. I was wrong. I destroyed everything. But I still love you. He sat in the armchair across from her, her words echoing in his mind. I still love you. But loving was not enough. Not after all that. He took a deep breath, looking at her. I need to know everything, Laura. I need to know every detail. Because I can't move on without it. She hesitated, but then began to speak. He told about the meetings, about the hidden messages, about the nights he spent making excuses. And with each word, Daniel felt the hole inside him grow. When she finished, silence took over the room. Then he asked what had been weighing on his mind since the beginning. Why did you make me look like a monster to him? She lowered her head, hands shaking. Because I knew that if he thought you were dangerous, he would stay. I needed him to stay. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Would you stay? Why? She looked up, and it was at that moment that he saw it. The fear. Repentance. And something else. Something he still didn't understand. Because I didn't know how to end this, Daniel. I didn't know how to stop. I was desperate. And I did something I can't undo. His heart sped up. What did you do, Laura? She started crying again, her hands covering her face. And in that moment, Daniel knew there was more. Something worse. Something he wasn't prepared to hear. But he needed to know. I needed to face that. Because, after everything, there was no going back. And Laura, between sobs, finally looked up at him, ready to tell the truth that was still buried. Daniel felt the weight of those words hover over him like a dense cloud. Laura was shaking in the chair, her hands clenching the fabric of her pants as her eyes filled with tears. He remained still, as if any movement could break the fragile control he still maintained over himself. Thoughts ran in disarray, trying to put the pieces of that puzzle together. The betrayal was already difficult to accept, but the feeling that something worse was coming kept him on alert. He needed to hear it, but part of him feared the words that would come out of her mouth. Laura took a deep breath, trying to contain the sobs that threatened to suffocate her. Daniel watched her every move, looking for signs of lies or manipulation, but what he saw was genuine desperation, a fear that didn't seem to be his alone. She looked up and, for a moment, seemed to want to run away. But he knew that running away was no longer an option. She needed to continue. I did something I can't undo, she said, and her voice broke at the end. Daniel crossed his arms, trying to maintain a firm posture, but the tension in his shoulders gave him away. The silence dragged on until she finally spoke again. I got involved with him because I was lost, but in the beginning, it wasn't about him. It was about me, about how I felt erased, invisible. I clung to it as an escape. But I lost control. He started to pressure me. I wanted more. He wanted me to leave everything behind, to start a new life with him. I said I couldn't. Said he still loved you. But he didn't accept it. He threatened to tell everything. He said he would destroy what was left of our marriage if I didn't do what he wanted. Daniel took a step back. So that's it? Did you stay with him because you were scared? Did you let it go this far because you thought he had power over you? Laura shook her head in despair. It wasn't just that. I knew I was wrong. I knew I had crossed the line. But I also knew that if you found out, you would never forgive me. I was trapped. Trying to keep both worlds going at the same time, but everything was falling apart. And that's when I did something worse. He felt his stomach turn. Worse? Than having already destroyed me? Than having lied to me, to him and to yourself? Laura stood up abruptly, walking to the window. I didn't look at him, as if eye contact would make it even more difficult. He started threatening me, Daniel. He said he was going to tell you, everyone, and that I would lose everything. I despaired. I recorded it. I recorded conversations, messages, made everything seem like he was harassing me. I made it seem like I was the victim. Daniel felt the world spin for a moment. Did you set him up? Did you make him look like the villain to cover up what he did? She turned around, eyes wide. I didn't know what to do. I was desperate. I just wanted to get out of it. I wanted to erase everything and start over with you. But he found out. He discovered the recordings, the edited messages. And that's when he really started blackmailing me. Daniel's anger bubbled, but something in him kept him calm. Every detail Laura revealed made everything darker, more complicated. He felt he was faced with a choice. He could expose everything, destroy her life just as his had been destroyed. Or I could try to understand, find some way to move forward, even though I didn't know how. Laura took a step towards him, her hands shaking. I know this seems unforgivable, and maybe it is. But I'm here, Daniel. I'm telling you the truth now because I can't live like this anymore. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know what happened. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that confession. When he opened them, he saw a woman torn to pieces before him. She had made mistakes, lies and betrayals, but here, in that moment, she seemed more human than she had ever been. But his pain was still real, still burning. You put this man in my house, in my life. You made me believe everything was fine while you schemed behind my back. And now what do you want? May I save you from this? May I help you fix what you destroyed? Laura cried, but didn't look away. I just want you to listen to me. I just want you to know that I still love you. Daniel turned to the window, feeling the cold air coming in through the crack. He needed to think. I needed to process everything. But every time he looked at Laura, he saw not only the woman who betrayed him, but also the woman he loved for so long. Laura approached him slowly, touching his arm. I know you will never trust me again. I know I screwed up. But I'm still the same person who loved you, who dreamed of you, who built this life with you. I just lost my way. Daniel pulled his arm away. No. You chose the path. He chose every lie, every betrayal. I don't know if you did it out of love, fear or selfishness. But I know I need to get out of here. He picked up the keys from the table and walked to the door. Laura ran after him, pleading. Please don't go like this. Don't leave me like this. He stopped, his hand on the doorknob. But he didn't turn around. I've been leaving for a long time. Only now did you realize. And he left, leaving her behind. Night fell heavily upon him as he drove aimlessly, the street lights passing by in blurs. Thoughts spun in circles, caught between anger and sadness. He knew that story wasn't over. There were still questions, there were still doubts. But at that moment, all I wanted was distance. Because no matter how much Laura had shown regret, the wound she left would not be easy to heal. And as he drove down the dark road, a single certainty accompanied him: nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the house felt even heavier than before. Daniel was sitting in the living room, his suitcases next to the door and his eyes fixed on the floor. The clock showed almost midnight, but he couldn't get up. Laura was in her room, locked in since the last argument. He could hear her footsteps from time to time, but neither of them had the strength to continue that conversation. His head throbbed, and every memory of the last few hours seemed to echo like thunder. Her words, her desperate eyes, her tears, everything was spinning in his mind without respite. But what tormented him most was doubt. No matter how much she had confessed, no matter how much he had heard every detail, he still felt like there were pieces missing, something that hadn't been said. He finally got up, grabbed his keys and left without looking back. The night was cold, and the wind cut like blades against his face. He drove through empty streets, without a destination. He felt like a stranger in his own life. I tried to remember the beginning, the laughs, the plans, the dreams that seemed so possible. But now, it all seemed distant, as if it belonged to someone else. He stopped the car near the park where they used to walk on Sunday afternoons. He stayed there for a while, staring into the darkness and listening to his own thoughts. I knew it couldn't go on like this. I needed to move on. He needed to find something that would make him feel alive again. Laura spent the night awake, pacing around her room as if the walls were closing in on her. You tried calling him several times, but his phone was off. He thought about going out and looking for him, but he knew it wouldn't do any good. Daniel wasn't ready to talk to her, and maybe he never would be. The fear of losing him for good was suffocating, but at the same time, I knew that I had been responsible for it. She threw everything away, and now all she had to do was deal with the consequences. The next morning, Daniel returned home just to get his bags. Laura was in the kitchen, sitting with a cold cup of coffee in her hands. Her eyes were red, but he avoided looking directly. He picked up his bags and headed for the door. She stood up quickly and ran to him, holding his arm. "Please don't go like this. It doesn't end like that." He let go slowly, without anger, but firmly. "It's over, Laura. You know that." She tried to say something, but the words died before they came out. He left without looking back, leaving her alone in the void she created. The next few months were a blur. Daniel moved to a small apartment, far from everything that reminded him of his old life. He threw himself into work, trying to fill the void, but the nights continued to be difficult. Laura's face appeared in every corner of his mind, and the weight of betrayal still haunted him. However, he started going out more, meeting new people, and it was in one of these casual encounters that he met Sophie. She worked in a bookstore and had a smile that seemed to light up any room. At first, Daniel resisted. He felt guilty for even thinking about moving on, but Sophie was patient. They started with simple conversations, then casual dinners, and before he knew it, Daniel was smiling again. Sophie brought lightness, something he didn't even know he needed. Laura tried to move on too, but regret gnawed at her. He returned to his parents' house for a while, trying to regroup, but the lonely nights and judgmental looks were hard to bear. She tried to talk to Daniel a few times, but he never answered. She found out about Sophie months later through a mutual friend, and that was the final blow. "I knew I was lost forever." She tried to convince herself that it was deserved, but the emptiness continued to haunt her. She returned to painting, immersing herself in art as a way to escape, but the guilt never left her. The lover, in turn, had an even more complicated fate. After the confusion, Daniel ensured that the manipulated recordings reached his wife. She not only filed for divorce but took everything she could, leaving him practically with nothing. He lost his job after the rumors began to circulate, and every attempt to get back on his feet was sabotaged by his own reputation. He tried to contact Laura a few times, but she rejected him, blaming him for everything that happened. Without support and without prospects, he ended up leaving the city, disappearing into anonymity. Daniel finally found peace with Sophie. She brought something he thought was impossible, the ability to trust again. It wasn't easy, and ghosts from the past still appeared from time to time, but he learned to deal with them. He learned that pain does not disappear, but transforms, and that moving forward is not about forgetting, but about accepting. Laura remained alone, trying to rebuild herself, but knowing that some scars never disappear. Her paintings began to sell well, and she found some relief in her career, but whenever she saw a happy couple on the street or heard a song that reminded her of Daniel, she felt the weight of the choices she made. The lover was never seen by any of them again. For Daniel, he became just a shadow, a reminder of what can happen when you trust someone who doesn't deserve it too much. Each one followed their own path, but the marks of that history remained. Daniel found a new beginning, Laura learned the hard way about the consequences of her actions, and her lover paid the price for his lies and manipulations. Betrayal destroyed lives, but it also taught difficult lessons about trust, forgiveness, and starting over. And as Daniel walked alongside Sophie in a park, he felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. If you've made it this far, leave your comment telling us what you thought of this story and share your opinion about the characters and their decisions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. And remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. Thanks for watching and see you next time.